Okay, let's dive into one of the biggest puzzles in modern history. How on earth did the end of one absolutely devastating world war set the stage for an even bigger, even more catastrophic war just 20 years later? It seems impossible. We're going to trace that road from peace right back to war.
And that's really the core question we're digging into here. It's wild to think about, isn't it? After all that bloodshed, all that loss, how could humanity find itself right back on the brink? And so quickly. We're going to connect the dots and see exactly how it happened.
So, where do we start? Well, our story doesn't actually begin with the start of the Second War. It begins with the really fragile peace that ended the first one. And as we're about to see, that foundation, it was basically built on sand. Just try to picture the world in 1918. Entire countries were in ruins. Economies had totally collapsed. An entire generation of young men was just gone. The desire for peace wasn't just a nice idea, it was a desperate, universal need. But here's the catch. Underneath all that hope, the deep-seated problems that caused the First War, they hadn't really been solved. They were just buried. It's the most logical question, right? If the will for peace was so strong, where did it all go wrong? Well, believe it or not, the answer starts with the official piece of paper that was supposed to secure that very peace. And that brings us to the Treaty of Versailles. Instead of focusing on, healing and rebuilding for everyone, its main purpose was to punish Germany. It stripped away huge chunks of its land, crippled its military, and forced it to pay reparations so enormous it was basically a mortgage on the country's entire future. And that really gets to the heart of it. Just look at those terms and ask yourself, what kind of feeling would that create in a country? It wasn't a foundation for lasting peace. For millions of Germans, it felt like a foundation for humiliation and eventually for revenge. So you've got a continent just simmering with resentment. Now let's add the next ingredient that turns that simmering anger into an absolute bonfire: total economic collapse. One single date, 1929. This is the year the global economy essentially drives off a cliff and the Great Depression begins. It changed everything. And this is so crucial because it's not just about money, it's about psychology. When people lose everything, their jobs, their savings, their sense of hope, they become desperate. And you know what? Desperate people don't look for calm, moderate answers. They look for saviors. They become open to extreme ideas they would have completely rejected just a few years before. Think about it. When your life feels chaotic and completely out of control, the promise of a powerful leader who steps up and says, "Don't worry, I alone can fix this," well, that becomes an incredibly appealing message. Fear creates a vacuum, and strong men love to fill a vacuum. So this widespread desperation created a massive power vacuum. Now, let's meet the leaders who rose up to fill it, armed with a powerful and very dangerous new ideology. In Germany, you had Adolf Hitler. In Italy, Benito Mussolini, and in Japan, it was a powerful group of military leaders who took the reins. These guys weren't your traditional politicians. They were radicals who saw this global crisis as their one big opportunity. And their message? It was simple, it was direct, and it was devastatingly effective. To people who had no jobs, they promised work. To nations that felt humiliated, they promised to restore their national pride. And to countries that felt weak, they promised to make them powerful again. The system they were selling was fascism. The basic idea is that the individual means nothing. The state, the nation, is everything. One leader holds all the power, and anyone who disagrees is silenced, often brutally. Free speech? No way. That's a threat that has to be eliminated. All right, so resentful nations, economic collapse, and the rise of these all-powerful dictators. Now for the final piece of the puzzle. What did the rest of the world do while all this was going down? Well, these new regimes started testing the waters. They started to see what they could get away with. And these weren't random acts. It was a very clear pattern. Japan invades China. Italy invades Ethiopia. Germany starts expanding its territory, bit by bit. They were all watching to see if anyone would dare to stand in their way. And this is the million-dollar question, isn't it? The threat was obvious. The aggression was undeniable. So why the inaction from countries like Britain, France, and the United States? Well, there were a few big reasons. First, war fatigue. The memory of World War I was so horrific, so traumatic, that the idea of another war was just unthinkable. On top of that, they were totally consumed by their own economic problems at home.
All of this led to a policy we now call appeasement, which is basically the belief that if you just give the dictators a little of what they want, they'll be satisfied and the problem will go away.
It's a simple analogy, but it's powerful. Does giving in to a bully make them stop? Or does it just make them bolder and more likely to demand more next time? The world's leaders gambled on the former, and they were tragically, horribly wrong. And this is how it all connects. It wasn't one single event, but a chain reaction. A harsh treaty created resentment. The economic collapse created desperation. That desperation opened the door for these fascist dictators. And a world too scared of another war just let their aggression go unchecked until it was too late.
And that brings us to a final thought that connects this history right to our present. This whole chain of events is a powerful reminder of how fragile things can be. It makes you think about the safeguards we have in place to prevent any one leader from gaining too much power. So that's something to consider. Thank you for joining this explainer.